All right, we're going holding by Pirkei Avos as my fathers. Again, we're going holding by Pirkei Avos as my fathers. Chapter through Mishnah 16. Right, it's part 62, I think. It'll be part 63, part 64, I'm sure. Again, we're going holding by Pirkei Avos. Ethics for our fathers, chapter 2, Mishnah 16. Speaking about the evil inclination, the Mishnah says the name of Rabbi Yeshua, evil eye, evil inclination, hatred of other people, remove a person from this world. So we spoke last week about this idea that basically the inclination comes and fights against the person to keep Torah. Obviously, inclination does not want you to keep Torah mitzvahs. And we spoke about Rav Arna Bells. Bless the memory, it said that the evil inclination fights with the person to get them to waste time. So we spoke all about wasted time. Different things a person potentially can waste their time with. And then Marvin says like this, he brings down that the evil inclination, what's it going to do? The evil inclination is going to fight hard against people in order to learn Torah, right? They don't want you to learn Torah, right? It's what the evil inclination wants. And certainly work on character development, as we always say, changing one character trait, as Yisrael Salanter said, changing one character trait in a person's lifetime is very hard. Yeah, so what's that going to do? What's the evil inclination going to do in all this together? It's going to cause the person, obviously, to have to work on themselves, but it's going to give them hard trials, which are going to make them fall from their spiritual level, right? From their high spiritual level, going to work hard, certainly against them. This is why the Gemara in Kedushin 31a says, greater is the one, and I have to, clarify the statement, but basically, greater is the one who was commanded to do mitzvahs and does them than someone who's not commanded to do them and he does them. Why? What does that mean? The evil inclination works that much harder against those who are commanded to keep mitzvahs. So what's my idea saying? So in short, he's saying, first of all, the evil inclination, is going to come against anybody, right? That's for sure, not just against people who learn Torah, but all the more so against people that learn Torah, right? That's its ultimate goal. So we said before, get a person to waste time when they should be learning, right? That's for sure. But evil inclination is going to come and give a person very difficult trials, extremely difficult trials, in order that a person, we spoke before, not going to rehash this, but gives the person very hard trials, so a person will be behind. So a person will give up hope. They'll give up hope. They'll say, I can't change. There's nothing for me to do. I'm never going to get out of, a certain level of Gehenna, a certain level of hell anyway, right? So what's the point? There's no point to work on it. I'm never going to get out. There's no hope, right? So we spoke about that. We certainly spoke about that. But the trials themselves, not just, that's part of it, certainly part of it, to give a person, the ability to be mi'ayish, to give up hope, makes sense. Because then a person will say, I sinned, I did this, I did that. I can never come back. There's no point. God's never going to accept my repentance anyway. So that's one aspect, right? That we spoke about. All right, that we spoke about. There's another aspect over here, right? And that is the person has very difficult trials, right? They have very difficult trials. Now, you tell me everybody does, right? Everybody has difficult trials, true. When it comes to people keeping Torah mitzvahs, see, if you don't keep Torah mitzvahs, then you're just going to, a person may say, well, it's my bad luck. Well, this is what happens. This is what happens sometimes. Sometimes you get sick. Sometimes you have a problem with kids. Sometimes you have problems, I don't know, people around you, family, other things. Okay, everyone's got issues. No one's, no one's saying not, but nobody, nobody in that world, is looking at it to the extent they're going to say, "Oh, it must be because of what I did, right? It must be because of how I think. It must be, whatever it is." Yeah, but they're not looking in those terms. They're going to say, "It's my bad luck. Stuff happens, right? This is the way it is." So what do? They live. They live according to what the heart tells them. They live according to whatever they feel like, right? Whatever they feel like. They want to enjoy life. Very good. They want to enjoy life to the best of their ability. Okay. Yeah. They don't want to be mashabit themselves. They don't want to be subservient, so-called any being or anything else, and so reason they don't have to change. They don't have to give in, they don't have to give in. It's gonna hurt their lifestyle, let's say, or whatever it is. But what's the main thing? What's the main thing? The main thing is that the evil Kodesh is gonna come, and again, everybody has trials. That's no question. Right? But the fact the person wants to keep, Torah mitzvahs, it looks like the trials are insurmountable. Right? Now, it could be these are trials we put ourselves through. Right? We make our own mistakes. We're our own worst enemy, let's say. Right? Or these are trials that the Galatian wants to go through. Yeah. And wants to make life so difficult, so to speak, a person will give up hope. Right? They're not going to be interested in even trying. Right? Because in today's generation, you don't have so many people, interested in trying to, sit down and figure out the puzzle. Right? They got a problem, they're working it through. At some point, a person may just give up because they're not interested. They can't figure out the answer. Or maybe they don't have a cool way to get the answer, whatever it may be. So what are they going to do? So, they may think about it for a little bit. Maybe, maybe to crack their brain a little bit. But at the end, what do? They look at the answer. They don't want to spend an hour on it, spend days thinking about it. They want the answer. They don't want the challenge. Right? How many people today, seriously up for the challenge or challenges in general? These type of things. Now you tell me some people, there are people that do, play Sudoku, they do crossword puzzles, whatever. So I always fond of saying that what do? What do they do when they get stuck? A lot of people when they get stuck cheat. They don't want to spend the time. Right? They don't want to put in the effort, they want to spend in the time. They don't want to spend so much time. Yeah, but what happens with these trials? These trials break a person. Right? These trials make it very, very hard. Very, very hard. And the person doesn't want to learn. They get shut down, they get, they just feel, and, I've gotten this complaint many times, right? They feel that, life's unfair. And I should be, having this much difficulty, so to speak. And I want to change my life, and I want to be better, and I want this, and I want that. Okay. Everyone according to their level. Right? But they say it's not fair. So we always say it's not about whether life is fair or not. These are the trials that we have, again, whether it's because our soul has to go through them, whether it's because we're put in these trials anyway, and nothing to do with our soul makeup or previous lives or anything like that. Yeah, but there are hard trials that a person will go through, and a person will be broken. Right? They'll just say it's too hard, I can't do it. It's not fair. I work so hard. In spiritual terms, other people seem not to work so hard, or not at all. They seem to have it easier. Okay, but as we always say, the closer you get to the king, or the closer you want to be closer to the king, you get burnt. Right? Literally, you can get burnt. So again, whether it's fair or not, God's looking at you in a totally different way that we've spoken about many times. Now, Mary brings down like this. He brings down, why is it that people trying to grow in spirituality have difficult times, have difficult trials. All right, as we said before, right, in order that they should fall. They should fall from their high spiritual level. What's gonna, then they'll be upset and try to work on other things, and let's say they fail again or whatever it is. What's gonna happen to break them? Okay, but he says we have a precedent. Gemara Kedushin says 31a, and wants to look it up. Greater is the one who's commanded to do mitzvahs, right, and does them more than someone who's not commanded to do mitzvahs and does them. Now, someone who's not commanded to do mitzvahs and they do them, that's a huge thing. Why? They're not commanded. They don't have any obligation, right? They have no obligation. Very good. Very good. They don't have any obligation. Okay. Since they don't have any obligation, the fact that they do it's a big thing. Right? That's a big thing. But that's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says greater is the one who's commanded to do mitzvahs. Why? If someone didn't have a command to do mitzvahs, they do mitzvahs good. Right? So they get credit for it. Okay. Right? They get major credit for it. Very good. Are they obligated? No. Not obligated. They're not obligated. Right? So if they do it, very good. If they don't do it, it's also good. Right? Does it make them better if they do it? Yes. It makes them better. Makes them a better person. Because they're trying to grow in spirituality. Okay. But even if it makes them better, okay, and what if they don't do it? That take away from their potential? Maybe. Maybe takes away some of their potential. But are they, again, bottom line, are they obligated to do it? Yes or no? No. They're not obligated to do it. Very good. Right? So if they're not obligated to do it, and they do it, good, they get merit. They get merit. But it's not taken away from them if they don't do it. Why not? They get brownie points, in other words. If they do it, good, they get brownie points. If they don't do it, they don't transgress. There's no transgression over here. You tell me if they don't do it, and they do it much less, maybe it's going to take them longer to reach potential. Good. We're not obligated over here. Right? There's no obligation. So it comes on the Gemara and says, greater is the person that is commanded to do mitzvahs and does them. Now, what's the reason? Right? The reason is because even though someone may not be commanded, to do mitzvahs, there's still an evil inclination. Doesn't mean there's no evil inclination. Right? Anyone in the process of conversion, let's say. Yeah, they're not under any command whatsoever to keep Torah mitzvahs until right before they fully convert. Right? They're not obligated. They're not obligated. No, obviously they do things good. They'll get credit for it. Very good, but they're not obligated. The person will say, but I still have an evil inclination. Right? I don't want to get up early and pray in Stuart and, other things. I don't have consistency. I mean, a lot of things. A lot of things we'll have difficulty with. Yeah, which means there is an evil inclination. Okay. Well, the evil inclination really doesn't come till later. Right? So after conversion according to this. Why? Because someone who's not commanded, someone who is commanded, and they do the mitzvahs, the evil inclination for that is 10 times stronger. Right? It's going to work much harder, even though a person will say, I have an evil inclination now, and if it works hard on me now, what's going to be after conversion? Good. Yeah. The evil inclination is going to work that much harder if someone's got an obligation than someone who doesn't have an obligation. Why? Someone doesn't have an obligation. It could be they get inspired, they want to do things, whatever. They may want to convert. Okay, the evil inclination can make it difficult. But why is it statistically that less than 20% of people interested in conversion, don't convert, even if they're accepted by a rabbinical court as a candidate for conversion? Why don't they convert? Why is it less than 20%? Less than 20% either because the person can't move, right? That is a big major problem. People can't move to a Jewish community. Or or it's an issue, let's say, whatever, they personal issue, family issues, health issues, right? Let's say both, right? Livelihood issues could be any number of things. Why a person doesn't end up converting. So even if a person's really serious, you got to be, as we said before, right? You got to be totally dedicated. This has to be the most important thing you'll ever do in your life. You have to go out and do it. Very good, right? This is what you have to do. Okay. But when you have obligations, and now, quote unquote, it's all for real. So what does the obligation do? Right? The obligation says, okay, if I'm a guy, I got to get up early and pray. Right? I got to keep Sabbath properly. Yeah, so that means I can't work at a certain time on Friday. Right? There are things you got to put in action. Things you have to do. Yeah, be careful not speaking Lashon Hara. You got to be careful not thinking, bad thoughts. There are 1.5 million things to do. Now, if you're not commanded, certain things, Copper would say, are beneficial to do it, right? It's a moral imperative, I would say, but not obligation. You're going to say, okay, so the inclination is much less. Why is it much less? Because you don't have an obligation. Right, to give you an example, speaking Lashon Hara doesn't apply to non-Jews. Yeah. Now, is it a good thing? Speak badly against someone else? Yes. Is it a bad thing to malign someone? Yes. When it's a lie, right? Even when it's the truth, right? In many cases. So that's all logical. According to Torah, that's not logical. A non-Jew has to keep what's logical according to the Torah. If you would ask most secular Jews and non-Jews, right? If you know it's true, you can only repeat it under certain circumstances. Yeah, tell me, but everybody knows it. Let's say it's true. Right? Let's say for argument's sake, everybody knows it. So if everybody knows it, why can't I just repeat it? So good. The Chofetz Chaim brings this down in a number of places. And he says just because it's truthful, most of the Lashon Hara is false. It's not true. But even it would be true. Even it would be true. Right? So, Jews don't have to repeat it unless it's under certain circumstances. Very good. That wouldn't apply to a non-Jew. But I would say, as a moral imperative, it's not a good thing to speak badly against others. Whether Jews or non-Jews, doesn't matter. Right? We'll be ultra-liberal here. Right? It doesn't really matter. So in either case, what's the issue? You'll tell me, it doesn't apply to me. I can say what I want. Good? Right? Doesn't apply to non-Jews. Okay. So if it doesn't apply to non-Jews, then why would we say it's still not a good thing to do? Because it's not. Because you're maligning someone's character, even if it's true. Even if it's true. Right? If you'd ask most people, you'd ask most adults, what do you think about cursing? So they curse. Most people curse. But you ask them, would you curse in front of your kids? Now it depends how old their kid is. Some would say, doesn't matter. If I was upset, whatever, I would curse even in front of them. All right, what if you get the 5-year-old? Still curse in front of them. Right, let's say. Okay, now let's say this 5-year-old goes around cursing others. Now, what's the parent going to do? Probably hold them down, wash the mouths out with soap, maybe. Then the kid will call the police on you for doing that. Right? So, they don't want a kid cursing. It's bad manners. Yeah, you can explain yourself in different ways without cursing, even if you're very angry. Okay, you can do that. I don't think any parent wants their kid cursing, in general, right? So then it gets a little bit dicey, or a little bit dodgy, as the English would say. Yeah, in other words, why would we say that? Because someone may say it depends how old the kid is. 10, 11, 12 years old, they may not think anything of it. If they're a teenager, they probably won't think anything of it, or very little. Yeah, but does the parent really want to hear them curse? Probably not. Question is where you draw the line, right? So again, it's almost like saying, do as I say, not as I do. Because I know it's not, if a 5-year-old does it, or a 7-year-old curses, Yeah, let's say. Parents are going to sit there and say that's a good thing, right? I don't think so. Because they understand fundamentally you shouldn't say that. Now, if they're older, they probably won't say anything. You know, maybe they'll say, okay, I understand you're upset, but why do we have to curse and and this and that? But again, most people do it. So this is the same idea. Even though, let's say, for non-Jew wouldn't apply, cursing wouldn't apply, right? Maybe unless you're using God's name, that could be an issue, even for a non-Jew. But let's say cursing in general, yeah, they don't have an obligation. They don't have an obligation to guard themselves, per se, right? Or guard their kids, let's say, on a Torah level, even a rabbinic level. There's no obligation, not written anywhere. Well, some will say, well, there are basic universal laws. So a basic universal law may tell you that shouldn't be done, right? There are basic laws. Everybody does it. So at a certain age, you'll say, okay, at a certain age, it's all right. At a certain age, it's not all right, but who deems what age? And who deems whether it's right or not? Right? So let's just say, for argument's sake, we'd all agree it's not a good thing to do. A lot of people do it. Kind of funny sometimes you hear someone much older, someone like, you hear someone in their 80s curse. They don't think there's anything wrong with it. Right? They curse. People curse. Again, as a universal law, is that a good thing? Or it's not a good thing? Right? So most likely, I think people would agree, it's not a good thing. Right? I would think most people would say it's probably not a good thing. They might fetch and they say, well, it depends what age, it depends on this, depends on that. But I think for the most part, people would agree it's not a good thing. Right? In general, it's not a good thing. So universally, yeah, maybe it's not a good thing. Obligation by a non-Jew, no. There's no obligation. Since there is no obligation, yeah, so we would say, okay, there's no obligation universally. Well, we'll say it's a moral imperative. Now, a moral imperative is worth something. Again, not obligatory. Certainly not obligatory. If a person, I don't know, hits bangs their hand with a hammer. Yeah. Are they most likely to yell they're in pain? Yes. Are they most likely to curse? Yes. Most likely. Doesn't mean they will, but probably they might. Probably a very good chance they might. Okay. But even if that's true, right? Even if that's true, you say, well, it depends on the times. Depends on the circumstances. Maybe they have a right because they're angry. Who gives you a right? For a Jew, you can't do it. Even if you banged your hand. If you took a hammer and smashed your hand. Building a sukkah, right hammer, right hand, hammer, left hand, bam. Yeah? Person may curse the high heaven, very good. Jew can't do that. Jew's not allowed to. You can say other things maybe, but you can't do that. Now, let's say someone's been working on themselves. And they haven't cursed for a long time. Very good. They haven't cursed for a long time. So even if they haven't cursed for a long time, could this happen in curse? Yes. Well, let's say they overcame the urge. They'll say other things, but they don't curse. Very good. So then you would ask them, okay, you just smashed your hand with a hammer. You're in tremendous amount of pain. Okay. You're in tremendous amount of pain. Now, being in a tremendous amount of pain, you didn't curse. That's huge. So my question would be, okay, even though you didn't curse, did you think of any curse word? Like, Rabbi, I'm not a tzaddik. I'm not righteous per se. I thought of a lot of curse words. Okay. right? So you could say you reached a certain level, which is good. That you didn't curse when you could have. That's very good, right? But there are higher levels to reach. There are always higher levels to reach. Well, then Mary put out last week or whatever, a few weeks ago, or actually, I may actually bring it up tomorrow, see how far we get. A class on the book of Leviticus, right? He mentions that when a person, is keeping the commandments, and the keeping the commandments to the best of their ability, yeah, they're walking in God's way, so to speak. You can't rest on your laurels, and all the time you can never, you're never bored. Why you're never bored, right? You're never bored because you always have what to review. You always have what to dig deeper, let's say, so to speak. You can always get to higher, different levels, by keep reviewing and, going deeper. Very good. So therefore, you have no time to learn anything secular, right? I'm not saying, unless you have a job or whatever, or you need to do it for a job. But there's a question, when is a Jew allowed to learn what they call Chachmas Yavonis? That literally it means Greek knowledge, secular knowledge, right? So the Gemara says when it's neither day or night. So when the sun is going down for that small amount of time, you'd be allowed to. Yeah. Now, today, a person needs to learn a profession, whatever. Okay, so you need to study this, right? You definitely need to study this. Very good. I'm saying studying for the sake of studying it, right? That's the question, right? So maybe there points out, and he says, but if you're learning and you keep reviewing and you keep going deeper, you don't have time to study. You don't have time to study these things, right? Because Torah is all encompassing, right? So we can't be lazy. You gotta, people hate to review. Probably they like to learn new things. Okay, but the more deeper you go, whatever, how much you learn, there's so much deeper to go. So because of that, my Rebbe points out, based on that, we're going to see this, I don't know, tomorrow or week after, we'll see, right? Leviticus chapter 18, verse 4 is going to bring down exactly that. Exactly that. If you're going in God's ways, very good. That means you don't have time to learn this stuff. Why? Because you're busy reviewing and going deeper. Right? So you don't get distracted. That's the way the evil inclination. Let me learn this, let me learn that. You didn't finish learning Torah properly. You never finished learning Torah properly. Right? Because, but, I got to get a degree, big lie, but, I need to do this, do that for a living, learn what I need to do for a trade or whatever. Okay, that you need to do. That you would need to do. Yeah. But once you've already, you mastered that or whatever, you have to learn. And what about other things? You'll say continual education, other things. Okay, you might have to a little bit. Very good. That does not stop the person from going further and deeper into it. Right? So his point is, the further and deeper you go, the less time you have to learn these other things. You won't learn these other things because there's so much to learn in Torah. There's so much to master in Torah. Right? To the extent where someone's going to ask you a question, you can answer like this. Right? You can answer like that. So you can say, it takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of work, applies to men, not to women, whatever. Okay. Takes a lot of work. Takes a lot of effort. What does King Solomon say in Proverbs? You got to want it more than anything else. So someone who doesn't have the obligation does not mean they don't have an evil inclination. But the evil inclination is not as strong. And again, people will say, I have a strong evil inclination now. What's going to look like after I convert? Good. But why is it stronger? Why is it stronger when someone has an obligation? And what's the simple thing? Because I have to do it. Because I don't have a choice. I have to get up early and to pray. Right? What do? Daylight savings time. What do you do in some places? Sunrise not till 8 o'clock. 7:30. I'm not going to talk about Scandinavia where it doesn't get dark. It's a whole other issue. Well, what do? Got to be at work 9 o'clock. Got to be at work at 8:30. What do you do while praying? Are you allowed to pray before the sun comes up? And if you are, what are you allowed to pray? Shemon Esrei has to be during the day. Cannot be before the day. Right? It cannot be before the 5 times fast. Cannot be before dawn. right? The whole question about saying the Shema at that time, also, whatever, which isn't really the point. So what do you do? So some of the things you're allowed to pray, very good. You pray before the sun comes up. Yeah, that you don't have a choice. Okay, so that's less of an issue. Shemona Esrei, what are you gonna do? You're gonna pray in your car, stuck in traffic, this and that. What do you do? The answer is, when you get to work, you gotta take time. At some point, you have to finish praying the morning service. That's what you gotta do. You don't have a choice. Yeah, you cannot pray. That's a choice. Not a good choice. Right? Best case scenario, you say a lot of things before Shemona Esrei. They just say Shemona Esrei at a different time. That's it. You don't have a choice. You have to take a break and do it. Most people probably take a few minutes, maybe take a little bit longer. Okay. But at some point you have to do it. Right? So yeah, it's inconvenient. True. What do? That Shabbos comes in early. Yeah, or let's say better. Sundown comes early in the winter. Some places sundown can be, let's say 4 o'clock, 4:30, maybe 4:45, some places even earlier. So a guy has to pray Mincha. He has to pray the afternoon service. Or does it work? What do? Let's say there's nowhere around you can pray. You have to pray on your own. But you have to do it. You have to make the effort. And what do you do in the summer? Let's say sundown's very late. Right? Sundown can be 8 o'clock, 8:30, depending where. England, much later. Right? Let's say. It can be much later. 10 o'clock, 10:30. You're tired. You don't have to go out and pray. You're tired. You'd rather pray at home, right? Some women will say, well, it's good thing I don't have that obligation. Okay. But a guy has that obligation. Yeah? So what does God say? Just shut up and do it. That's what you have to do. I'm giving you an opportunity. Giving you a golden opportunity. Pray to me. Golden opportunity. You can say, but it's late. It's too hot. Or not, whatever it is, but we live. You don't want to go out. Person's home, they don't want to go out. I get it. The comfortable where they are. It's late. Makes sense. For a guy, you don't have a choice. Yeah, you could pray at home. It's not a good idea. Definitely not a good idea. But you have a choice. You definitely have a choice. Yeah. But there's an obligation. The Torah makes clear there's an obligation, or in this case, it's rabbinical. The Torah obligation to pray, right? Is if you say thank God, you fulfill your Torah obligation. Everything else is rabbinical, right? The time, the place, what you say, when you say. Okay, it's all rabbinical. We don't just say, oh, it's all rabbinical. That's kind of like degrading the rabbis because the mitzvah, an obligation to listen to them. Okay. We get an obligation, right? All you men out there, you got an obligation. Very good. Now, again, if you're under onus, beyond your control, person's sick, let's say. Okay, so what do you do? So what if you do if you're sick? You can't pray. What do you do? A person's sick, stuck in bed, they can't. God can't expect you to pray when you can't, right? So over here, you have an obligation. If you're not under onus, see, there's someone to pray at night, later at night. It's easier, right? It's a lot easier. What do you do if something goes down relatively early during the day and you got to pray and you're at work? You got to pray. You got to stop. You got to stop. Before sundown, or you got to take a break and do it, or whatever, on your time. That's what you have to do. That is the obligation. That's it. No way around it. Person say, wow, I can pray at home. Okay. But as we always say, that prayer gets scrutinized like 1 billion times more than if you pray with 10 men. Congregation, God looks at the good and the bad of the congregation. Yeah. But you're not as scrutinized Even if you don't, even if you not doze off, but even if you like daydream or whatever, and you're sort of going through the motions, still you get a lot more credit than if you pray by yourself and you're totally scrutinized on your prayers. Now, some people, okay, there's nothing around them, they can't go, so they have to pray on their own. Okay, that's a different issue. Still have to pray, right? That's a different issue. What's the point? Point is, there are many things we have to do that we're obligated to do. And because you're obligated to do, what does the evil inclination do? It doesn't just lie down and die. What does the evil inclination do? It makes it very hard. Makes it extremely hard. Makes you tired. Makes you fatigued. Makes you not want to do it. All kinds of things. Right? All kinds of things. The evil inclination will come along, right? And make it so much more difficult. And the reason is because you got an obligation to do it. So therefore, Rabbi says from the Gemara in Kedushin that greater is the one who's commanded to do mitzvahs and does them. Because if you're not commanded, big deal. Yeah, you do it, you don't do it, you're not commanded. Right? 100%. Right? First is not commanded. Okay. So you're not commanded. If you do it, certainly can help you. If you don't do it, okay. You don't lose anything by not doing it. But you're not commanded. Right? Greater is the person that's commanded and does it. Very good, but the evil inclination throws the kitchen sink at you and makes it very hard for you to do it. Yeah, changes your mental state. A lot of things. Doesn't make you want to do anything, right? In many ways. But guess what? We're stuck in all kinds of situations. By being in all kinds of situations, you don't have a choice. We're going to say, the excuse can be, and again, the topic here isn't prayer per se, but the excuse can be, well, I'm getting beaten down alive. This is good work of the evil inclination. Getting beaten down alive, I don't even want to pray. Yeah, I'm not interested in prayer. Because if this is what happens and this is how it goes, I don't want to pray, right? I certainly don't want to pray. Okay. So evil inclination gives you all kinds of excuses why. I'm not saying it's right. Yeah. No, people are weak in general. They'll feel overwhelmed. And what happens when you feel overwhelmed? You throw in the towel. A lot of people will throw in the towel. And it's very easy to understand why. Because, again, as we said before, they're getting beaten down in life. They look what other people have and what other people do, and and it's not fair, and they have an easier time, and a this and a that. Okay, that's all part of the test. But see, once you have an obligation, and this is really the point, once you have an obligation, you have no choice. Again, you could choose not to do it. You could shirk your responsibility. Could do that. 100% you could do that. Say, well, God will understand because of what I'm going through. I don't know. God has a lot of mercy, not infinite. God has mercy, right? But at the end of the day, we say, agra. According to the amount of pain and the difficulty, that's the amount of reward a person gets, right? So even if it's hard for a person, even if it's hard, what's the obligation? The obligation is I have to do it. That's the obligation. Now, let's say it's clear cuts, no ifs, ands, or buts. You have to do it. Right? This is what you have to do. The evil inclination is not going to lie dead over here. The evil inclination is going to throw all kinds of obstacles. Many, many obstacles. When a lot of these things happen, a person has a tremendous amount of difficulty preparing for Shabbos. Fridays, you crunch for time. You always crunch for time, even if Shabbos comes in late. All the more so, Shabbos comes in early, and something goes wrong. I'm not saying every Friday, but something goes wrong. I get delayed and I get behind and this. But at the end of the day, you can't light Shabbos candles after sundown. Doesn't matter what your intention is. Doesn't matter if you have a pre-existing flame. You're not allowed to do it. So you got to work hard to make sure that doesn't happen. Yeah, that's what you have to do. And you have to prepare. Now, it's all the preparation in the world, get to that point. It should. But there are things we don't factor in. Or potentially we don't factor in. But a lot of these things happen because then you get flustered. And then you get aggravated and you get many other, you got many other things to do, even if you're ahead of the game. Even if you're ahead of the game, you got many things to do. What happens? I don't know, something happens. Now, come sundown, you gotta stop. Yeah, no matter what you're doing, you gotta stop. So I've had, people ask, it's a snowstorm, whatever. What do you do? You're not gonna get there on time, you're stuck on the road. So you try not to get stuck on the road. All right. Well, sometimes what you're gonna have to do is abandon the car and go. Just go by foot. If possible. Yeah. Or try, call someone, a non-Jew, who knows what. Try and get that, out of the situation. But in general, sometimes, even if you prepare ahead of time, even if you leave early, there could be traffic, could be an accident, could be any number of things. I always say better get there early than get there right at the end. Meaning right before candlelight and right before sundown. Right? Much better get there, even if you're there a couple hours early, so what? Right? You don't want to take chances. Because if you take chances, you get burned. Many, many times you'll get burned. And there are people that procrastinate, they leave late, and they don't prepare, and this. And sometimes they get stuck. Because they didn't leave on time. That's not what they did. They can have a number of excuses why. Okay. But it's also part of the inclination. Yeah. That's what the evil inclination does. Very good at it. Doesn't need me to agree. But that's why, in this case, someone who's commanded with all the obligations and fulfills those obligations much greater. Because there can be any number of obstacles stopping the person. Now, someone will say, but if you're not obligated, doesn't mean you don't have obstacles. Good. I didn't say that you don't have obstacles. You're at the same level over here. If a person's obligated to do something, you have to do it. Right? Before the 15th of Nisan. Right? 15th of Nisan comes, guess what? Your house has to be clean for Passover. You have to have matzahs, you have to have bitter herbs, 4 cups of wine, grape juice, whatever it is, you have to be ready. God doesn't care what happened before. Nobody cares what happened before. It has to be done. A person has to be ready. A person has to prepare. That's the way it goes. You can say, wow, I didn't, I could have, or this or that. Bottom line, did you prepare ahead of time or not? I got injured, I couldn't do these things, but you got to be ready. Doesn't matter what life throws at a person. A person has to be ready. Someone said to me that, what if you have less help? Comes to, cleaning for Passover and, now you're older, so, you get help, you find help. Or you do it yourself, you plan ahead of time, whatever. So someone said, the older you get, your grandkids will help you. Very good. Very good. So I got 2 grandchildren, one's 12, gonna be bar mitzvah next year, one's 11, I think, or gonna be 11. Could they help out? They could help out. Are they going to help out if I needed it? That's a different issue. Different issue. But in theory, that's true. If you can't do it yourself, let's say, you're older, I have a friend of mine, they don't have any kids at home. I mean, they only have 1 child anyway, but every year it gets harder. It's harder to clean, move things, this, that. They're 2 people. Okay. Still gonna be planned, still gonna get done. Have they, unless someone was injured, do they have I got a lot of grandkids, still, and older grandkids are coming home. Have they in recent years? I don't think so. I'll have to ask him tomorrow and see. Right? I don't think that's the case. But in theory, that could happen. Right? In theory, that could happen. Would I rely on it? I wouldn't rely on it. Certainly wouldn't rely on it. Push came to shove, okay. Set up hours, different things. I'm sure in families that helps. Grandkids, nieces, nephews, whatever. They come up if you have that network. And they don't live so far away. Okay. What if you don't have that network? Let's say. So you got one or two choices. Either you pay other people to help, right? They have many organizations that have people come in and help you clean. Maybe do a lot of the grunt work with the, cleaning, let's say microwave and oven, fridge, whatever. They do a lot of the grunt work that's, it's harder for a person to do. Okay. Or you do it yourself. That's it. Right? But it has to get done. It has to get done. Right? As I told the story before, I made a list. And if my kids what they have to do, whatever. And one day came, okay, we'll turn over the kitchen. So to my older kids say, yeah, but it's not on the list. I was like, but it's all hands on deck because it's the hardest thing to do. So, everyone's gonna help. They're like, and there's like one left. Insubordination. Yeah, don't worry, I cut them out of the will, so it's good. Yeah, just kidding. But so what do you do? Insubordination. Yeah, I couldn't convince them this and that. They don't want to work. They work too hard as it was. Let's say they don't want to, do any extra work. I don't have a choice. You think gotta do it yourself. Right? Spend hours doing it before they thought better of it and came back and helped. Okay. And I was like falling on my face. Okay. But it had to get done. Right? That's the bottom line. Right? Like this job, coming right before, it's always usually try and turn over a few days before. Right? So certainly, cooking can be done and all that. Very good. But it has to be done. And if they don't do it, you have to do it. Right? Or if you don't have anyone to do it, you have to do it. Right? And now if a person's older and it's harder and this and that, so either you take it in sound bites, you do little by little till you get it done. Right? You set up a chart, you set up a plan, very good. Right? Or, again, the harder stuff, if you have a little bit of money, so hire people to do it. Hire people to do the harder stuff. It's gonna take longer, it's gonna be more taxing. You do that. Now, many years I never had any help. I did it myself. Till it became, certain things became harder. Right? So I had people, in the oven, clean the microwave, some other things. It just is unfeasible otherwise. Right? So sometimes it has to be done. Okay. And again, if you don't have the money to do that, so then you have to do it yourself. But again, it has to get done. That's the bottom line. Right? You're obligated as a Jew to do it. As a non-Jew, you do it. You don't do it, whatever. You don't have obligations either way. Right? But as a Jew, 100% you have an obligation. So if you have an obligation 100%, what does it matter what's going on? Yeah? What does it matter? What does it matter what's going on? Right? It shouldn't matter at all. Right? It should have no ramifications whatsoever. Because at the end of the day, as we said before, God wants it, God wants it done. And you have an obligation to get it done. This happened, the other thing happened, makes it more difficult. Very good. Makes it more difficult. Okay. Even if it would make it more difficult. Comes the 15th of Nisan. Right? We're less than 2 months away. Yeah. 15th of Nisan comes. There's an obligation to have everything done. And you have to go into that night, again, you can stay over the Haggadah, you can drink the wine or grape juice, you have 3 matzahs, all these things, but it has to be done. Right? So we have an obligation to get it done. the stakes are much higher, which means it doesn't matter. It's got to get done. Yeah, so you got to plan and you got to work at it and you got to make it viable. Because if it's, if you don't do that, you won't get it done. Right? And it's like any mitzvah that you have to do. Right? Make it even a little more graphic. Right? Sukkot comes 3 days. 3 days, 4 days, after Yom Kippur. Now, what do you do? What do you do? Sometimes Yom Kippur's on a Wednesday night. So Yom Kippur's on a Wednesday night to Thursday night. Very good. So then you go into Shabbos. Thursday nights, whatever, you finish Yom Kippur. Then you go into Shabbos. And then Sunday, Monday, Sukkah starts. Which means I have to have my Sukkah built. I have to have my arboretum. Right? I have to have my 4 species. Right? My lulav, my esrog, my willows, which would normally get at the end because they dry out quicker. So and myrtle leaves. Now, so when you build your sukkah. Now, if you got an easy sukkah to build, you can do it. It's not gonna take you very long. Good. So maybe you can wait. Maybe you can wait till after Shabbos to do it, or do a little bit. Let's say after Yom Kippur. You finish it after Shabbos. Very good. Whatever takes you a while. Right? Maybe it's not so easy to put up or whatever. But it's gonna take you a while, so you gotta do it before Yom Kippur. Right? You should do it before Yom Kippur. Right? There are some people who build their sukkahs in the middle of Elul. Very good. Yeah, they'll build not all of it. They'll build, a good part of it. So they don't have to do that much. They can spend the other time, finding their 4 species and then finish up. You can do it ahead of time. Okay. But here, here you don't have much time. Here you maximum you have 4 days. But if Shabbos comes in the middle, right, or at the beginning, right, let's say, Shabbos comes then, so then what do you do? Then what do? You got to get it done. Yeah. So that means you got to prepare ahead of time. That's what it means. You have to prepare. You have to prepare ahead of time, right? It doesn't matter when you do it. I mean, as long as you don't do it on Shabbos when it's forbidden or whatever, right? It doesn't necessarily matter when you do it. It's got to get done. Bottom line, right? Comes 14th of Tishrei. 14th of Tishrei, Sukkah has to be done. Yeah, you have to have your 4 species. You have to be ready. You have to have food ready, right? 2 days outside of Israel, 4 meals. You're going to have at least 4 meals. So you got to be ready, right? No such thing as, well, I couldn't get it done. You got it. Yeah, again, bottom line, unless you're like total onus or whatever, it's totally beyond your capability. What's the bottom line here? Bottom line is it's got to get done. So this is exactly what the Gemara says. Greater is the one that has the obligation to do it and does it, because there are a lot of hurdles in between. Yeah, a lot of difficulty in between, and there's a lot of pressure. Anyone's ever prepared for Passover? You're turning over, right? You're turning over the kitchen. Your house looks like a disaster. That's normal, right? That's the way it's supposed to be. That's when you say, "Oh, now it feels like Passover." Yeah. So you get all your Passover stuff, let's say, in one place. You have to take out all your chametz stick stuff. You have to make sure everything's kosher, everything's clean, whatever. And then you switch. But that's, that takes time. That's the hardest thing to do. So it could be, you don't do it in one shot. You for sure don't do it in one shot. And the reason is because it's going to be too hard to do, right? Unless you have help. So I remember one year, a few years ago, or more, whatever. I had a number of people that's it. That was the day. That was the day they came, and they helped out tremendously. We have a lot of different hands. Okay, everyone's bumping into each other and everything else, so it's kind of funny in different ways. But it took a lot less time, right? It took a lot less time to do, but it helped out tremendously. And what if you don't have that help? Like we said, it had to get done. Like some of my kids say, like, "What'd you do when we were little?" I said, "I didn't have any help, right? I probably could have got help. I had money then, so I could have got help, whatever. I got help when I absolutely needed it. Yeah, it's only when I needed it. I got it. And when that wasn't the case, what happened? Did it myself. Yeah, I got done myself. Yeah, I think me, my wife, whatever. Yeah, my kids are too little to do anything. So, so, so I was like, what did you do before, we got bigger and started doing these things? What do you think? Everything got done by itself? I mean, at some point I had help, very good. But, before that, it's like nothing ever happened. Like, what do you think? You know, boxes were moved, this, that, like, and so you must have had all these extra hands. I said, yeah, we had 4 hands. We had 4 hands. Yeah, no help in general. But again, yeah, get done. 100% it had to get done. And if it didn't get done, it's a problem. That's a serious problem. Yeah, so you got to plan out. And someone, just on this topic, someone told me, a Jew, they say, I'd love to keep Shabbos, but that's when I do all my errands. So I said, I have an interesting idea. Why don't you try and like over, you know, during the week, a few days during the week, spread it out so you don't have to do your errands on Shabbos. Yeah, so I thought that was like the greatest advice anyone ever heard. So I said, you got to plan. You could use that as an excuse, but what could God tell you? God says, I give you 6 other days. I give you 6 other days, take care of things. Take care of other things. And say, well, I need to go to the post office. Post office is not open on Sunday, right? I don't have so much time during the week. Okay, you got to plan it. You have to plan it. Yeah, you plan it step by step to make sure things get done. So therefore, you don't have that problem, and certainly, you will not have that excuse. They won't have God say, but you could have planned it out. You could have done this. You could have done that. You could have done the other thing. You could have. You chose not to. Now, you might have had good excuses, but now you go back and think about it and say, wait a minute. I don't have any excuses now. I could do it, some of it this day. I could do some of my errands this day. Okay, maybe it's inconvenience. Maybe you don't have, so much time. Okay, but at the end of the day, can a person make a plan? Yes. Can they stick to the plan? They should be able to. Tell me, okay, there's a hurricane warning, there was a bad snowstorm, there's certain things that happen. Weather-wise, maybe a person got sick, I don't know, different things. Different things can impede a person from doing what they need to do. Very good. But at the end of the day, a Jew has obligations. If you have obligations, you have to uphold what the obligations are to the best of your ability. Now, we can make excuses. We're very good at that. We can make all kinds of excuses why I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. Or someone will say, I'm not very disciplined. Well, get disciplined. I can never wait, let's say, 6 hours between meat and milk. No, you can't. It's inconvenient. You don't want to count the hours. You don't want to feel like, I don't know, you're missing something, whatever. It's inconvenient. Say, but I'm not disciplined. Okay. Heard some people say that. Takes a lot of discipline to do all these things. Yes, it does. I had someone once tell me, one of my kids had to wait, I don't know, like 3 hours between milk and meat. Or the other way around, between meat and milk. So whatever, at a certain age, you give them straight away, wash out their mouth a little bit. At a certain age, they're going to start waiting. A couple hours, 3 hours. By the time they're like, 9 or 10, they should already be starting waiting 6 hours, right? And somebody says, but that's cruel. That's being cruel to your kid. They don't need to be taught discipline. They're 7 years old. They're 8 years old. Okay. But how do you train them? You have an obligation at the age of 5 or 6 to start training them. Even by the age of 3 when they start talking. You got an obligation to get them to say blessings. Yeah, you have to separate them from non-kosher things. I mean, there are a lot of obligations educating kids. Very good. That's cruel? No. You're educating them. How do you expect them to be Orthodox Jews if you don't educate them? And they have to learn discipline. Yeah. They have to learn you can't eat, milk right after you eat milk. You gotta wait. So depending on a certain age, you gotta wait a certain amount of hours. So some people have what they call fleischophobia, right? Meat, fleisch is meat in Yiddish, right? They have meat phobia. Why they have meatophobia? Because they don't want to wait 6 hours. Or they have breadophobia. Why they have breadophobia? Because they want to bench. They don't want to say graze after meals, right? So yeah, potentially different, phobias for different people. But that's not being cruel, right? That's just the opposite. You're educating them. You're training them to be disciplined, right? Now, again, is it always easy? No. I can say it's always easy. A person eats meat. Let's say they forgot. It's like, oh, now I gotta wait 6 hours. So, I always say, we're gonna eat par of chocolate. We're gonna eat chocolate on meat or milk. No, I don't like par of chocolate. I really like milk chocolate. I want to eat milk chocolate. Okay. I want to eat ice cream. I want this. Okay, but you gotta wait. Now again, someone comes along and says that's cruel. That's not cruel. Right? That's educating in the best way possible. But you're teaching them they have to be disciplined. Right? Just like you take a 10-year-old. You take a 10-year-old kid, what's the first Gemara that they learn? They learn how to learn. First Gemara they learn how to learn, second chapter of Baba Metzia. Second chapter of Baba Metzia is called Eil Metzias. What is Eil Metzias all about? Lost objects. So people ask the question, why do you teach them that? Why is that the first thing they learned? So one of the reasons the first thing they learn is because they have to learn, and this goes back to what we said before, they have to learn that the world is not ownerless. The world is not hefker. In other words, you have a lost object. You got to see, do I have to return it? Can I say finders keepers, right? In general, does it have signs on it? Is it put in a certain place with a certain amount there? How is it placed? There are a lot of questions, right? A lot of questions. What's the most important thing? What's the most important thing they're taught? The most important thing they're taught is the world's not ownerless. That means we have obligations in the world. That means that, if I find something, a lot of times finders keepers doesn't apply. Again, a person found a random bill somewhere. They can take it. If they found a whole bunch of bills in a certain place, then they'd have to put up a sign. They'd have to put up a sign, say, hey, found a certain amount of money. If you have, any signs on it, call this number. But to learn that it doesn't belong to you. That in the world in general, I can't just do what I want. Now again, what's the way of the world, which we don't really care, but what's the way of the world? I can do what I want. Finders keepers. Right? Losers weepers. Very good. That doesn't apply over here in some cases. Some cases it will apply. Right? But you're teaching a child from a very young age. The world is not a world where I can just do what I want. There are obligations. Right? There are many obligations. So they have to look at something, if something got lost, they have to look at it, okay, do I have an obligation for this in order to what? In order to put it out there if someone lost it. You have it. And if they produce, proper criteria, then you give it back to them. Right? But they have to produce certain criteria. Okay. But that's teaching them discipline. That's teaching them things that they find or they see doesn't necessarily belong to them. Yeah, that's why they're taught that at a very young age. So it's the same thing, educating a child and saying, you have to wait another half hour. You have to wait another hour between meat and milk. Again, it's not an act of cruelty over here. That's an act of educating them and showing there's discipline. That they have to have discipline. Someone can say, well, I don't have any discipline. That's not an excuse. That might be the reality. That very well could be the reality. Yeah. They don't want to change. They don't want to be inconvenienced in life. Right? I've heard that from some people. I told them, just admit it's not about, Webster's 8th definition or about that. Just say, I don't want to be inconvenienced. So I won an argument once. Didn't change anything, but over the years, I told someone finally, just admit it has nothing to do with whether it's true or not true. You don't have any discipline. You're not looking for discipline. And you don't want to be inconvenienced in life. So they said, if I admit it, will you be happy? I said, yeah, just admit it. Because I think that's the truth. And they admitted it. Okay. Didn't change anything. Right? Certainly didn't change anything. But that's the truth. It's not about, God give the Torah Mount Sinai or not, or this and that. People don't want to be inconvenienced. If someone once told me, if you convince me it's true, says I have to keep it. I can do what I want. You're right. So you proving to me doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything because you're not going to do anything. So there's no point. Right? But if you are convinced that this is the truth, or certainly could be the truth, and you don't follow through as a Jew, that's worse. That's definitely worse. At least you acknowledge it might be true. That's why, I've only met one intellectually honest person over the years, the last 32 years or more. Because they said if I look, they were married to a non-Jew, a Jew. So they said if I look into Torah mitzvahs, I find out it's true. They use exact this language, but similar. If I find out it's true, and I have to change, I'm not willing to change. So I'm not going to look into it. Okay. That's being honest. That is sticking their head in the sand. Okay. Right? I'll give them credit, though. I will give credit where it's due. That is true. They're just saying, I'm not going to look into it because if I find out it's true, I'm not going to change. Okay. Everyone else will give me like their dime store, explanation of what they think the Torah is and why it is and this and that, based on absolutely nothing, right? No credentials, no nothing, no proofs or anything. It's what my heart tells me. Okay. Or I get what my heart says. Doesn't matter what my heart says. Yeah. But they're not talking the rhyme of reality. So like argue with them is like talking to a brick. Okay. So normally most people don't like talking to a brick. Good. I don't usually waste my time either. That's it. But most of these people, that's the bottom line. They don't want to be inconvenienced. Not only that, they don't want to be told what to do. They can say you're right, and what do you think? And it's only the rabbis, it's blah, blah. Okay, but they're not arguing issues. You say, okay, it's a good point. You want to, we can take this a step further. Let's take it a step further. You argued this, so let me bring, but they're not interested. They're not interested. Again, you have to see where the question's coming from. Some people ask questions, they ask questions. Where's God during the Holocaust? I said, I got a great book. It's called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. You want to read it? It's like, no, it's just a question I ask rabbis, make them fidget. Okay. I can watch there, I don't have my head grow. Yeah, like, okay. You're not interested in an answer. You got to see. Right? You got to see where the question comes from, right? This is like we always say by the Haggadah. Right? There are 4 sons, right? The wicked son, the wise son, a simple son, the one doesn't know how to ask. The answer to the wise son, the wise son and the evil son ask the same type of question. Wise son gets an answer, evil one doesn't. Why not? For the evil son, you blunt his teeth. Why don't you give an answer? What's a simple reason? Because he's not interested in an answer. He's got an agenda, right? I think, Judaism discriminates against women. What's the answer? Okay. I think Judaism, is anti-pig. Okay. I think Judaism, you say, okay, like enough, after enough times, you say, okay. So why do you keep saying okay? Well, you didn't ask me a question. There's no question there. You made a statement. When people get baited into this, they say, oh, I got to answer. They didn't ask a question. They didn't ask a question. I'll give an example. Someone said to me, I bet, you believe my son, is living in sin. Now, technically not, because, this person's son's a non-Jew, but whatever. Okay. Yeah, so I played along. I said, yeah. I said, 100% I believe he's living in sin. I didn't have to answer that. I mean, that was a question, wasn't a statement. Yeah, that was a question. If the person would have said, well, a person living with someone else, that's not living in sin. Yeah. So what's the answer? Okay. No, but once they ask the question, let's say, a question about, women in Judaism, yeah. So they say, why do you keep saying no? I said, because you didn't ask a question. You say, if I were to ask your opinion on what you think Judaism says against women is discriminatory, what would you say? That's a question. That's not an agenda, it's a question. But if someone's making a statement, again, we get baited into this. Very easy to get baited in because, these are loaded questions. So when someone makes a statement, there is the answer. They ask a question, it's one thing you want to answer or not answer, whatever. But if they don't ask a question, they're making a statement. They have an agenda. Very good. Very good. So in this case, in this case, they say, I think, Judaism discriminates against women. Okay. There's no question being asked. That's the same thing. That's the same thing by the evil son. By the evil son, you blunt his teeth. Why do you blunt his teeth? Because he's not asking a question. In other words, even if you give an answer, it's going to bait you. Right? Right? Like Rav Chaim Brisker, blessed memory, was the head of the Yeshiva of Volozhin after Rav Chaim of Volozhin 150 years ago, when Torah Giants, the last Torah Giants, that generational question. And he had a student that went off. So he asked him, what happened to you? So he said, I had questions. I had a lot of questions. So Chaim asked him, what did you have questions? You had questions when you were learning yeshiva, or you had questions afterwards? He said, no, I had questions afterwards. So he said, I can't help you. He said, if you had a question you were learning yeshiva, is one thing, right? But here you have an agenda, right? So you can't answer an answer, right? Or we can't answer a statement. Right now, this is food for life here. Meaning that there are many, many times when it comes with family, let's say friends or old friends or whatever, they make these type of statements. And they make underhanded comments. And they make, they want to make you feel like you're backwards and, you know what you're doing, and you're being brainwashed, all this. So you get in the conversation somehow, whatever the conversation is, and they start baiting you. Yeah, Judaism is this, and Judaism is that. And what's the first thing a person's going to do? They're going to be on the defensive, but they want to answer. They're going to say, no, it's not really true. The reason it's not true is because of this and because of that, but they didn't ask that. Right? We got baited into it. Right? They didn't ask a question. We're already like 3 steps ahead of what we're going to answer, but they never asked the question. Like someone said, a number of years ago, I got locked in my bathroom, and whatever, it took me a while to get out of the bathroom, because whatever. The door got jammed. Whatever happened. So I said, tongue in cheek, no pun intended, well, I couldn't even pray because I was in the bathroom. So the person said, oh, is that one of the rules? Again, they're baiting me, right? Is that one of the rules? Now, I could have said a lot of things to that answer. My answer was yes, it's one of the rules. That was it. I could have said 150,000 different things to that question. It was a question. Yeah, it wasn't a statement, it was a question. Yeah. So like I said, you don't understand, what it means to be in the bathroom and this, even if it's clean, blah, blah, blah. They weren't interested in the answer. Right? I wouldn't have lasted 30 seconds. I wouldn't have lasted 10 seconds before they're just like, all right, stop. Yeah, they wouldn't, I knew what I was dealing with. Right? So that was an answer. That was the answer. Is that against one of the rules? Yeah. Against one of the rules. There was no follow-up question to that. They didn't ask anything from that. Yeah? They just wanted to say something that made me look bad. They just wanted a stupid rule. Okay. Right? How they say, oh, it sounds like one of these, crazy, fanatical, whatever. Now, if they would have said it like that, that's not a question. Right? They're making a statement. So again, a person can get baited, they get angry, and they can say, oh, you don't understand. God gave the Torah and he passed it down and how it works. And they didn't ask anything. They didn't ask one thing. They just made a statement. Yeah, that's why you don't blunt. That's why by the evil son you blunt steel. Right? My kids already know all the, I already know that answer because I was asking them pass it on. So why don't you draw them close? Why don't you do kiruv with them? Draw them close. That'd be the best thing to do, right? Why would it be the best thing to do? Because you want to bring someone closer. Very good, right? You want to do kiruv with them. Very good. But then ask a question, right? That would be the simple answer. So give an answer. Deserves an answer. Giving them an answer, a good answer, philosophical answer, whatever type of answer, could potentially draw them closer. Yes, it very well could. Will it? I don't know, but propaganda never goes to waste, right? So give an answer, draw them close. What's the answer? You don't. Why don't you give an answer? Because it's got an agenda. This person has an agenda. When a person has an agenda, there's no question, right? It's an agenda. And someone will say, oh, I believe like this, or I believe like that, or I believe the other thing. Okay. They've not made one statement, right? Not one statement. But we get caught up, right? We get caught up. So back to our topic here. And that when a person does something and they're obligated to do it, right? It's much harder. The reward is much greater, right? Because again, we don't have excuses here. We have no excuses. We have obligation. The obligation is I got to do this to the best of my ability. Now, if a person, there's an onus, it's beyond their control, whatever it may be, okay, right? Onus Rahman Patra, the Gemara says, if I'm under onus, right, it's beyond my capability to do it. Whatever it may be, Rahman, the Torah says, Patra and Pater, I'm exempt. So if it's a true onus, it's beyond my control, I'm exempt. God cannot expect you to do something if you don't have the capability to do it, right? You're incapacitated. Yeah, a person's sick. They got a fever. They got 100 fever, right? They're throwing up. Who knows what else? Yeah, God's going to expect them to, go sit and learn, and go pray. You're in bed. Can't get out of bed. Yeah, you get out of bed, you faint. Other thing, whatever it may be. Dad, you're exempt. God's not going to expect you to go further. You can't expect that. I mean, if you would, it wouldn't be fair. Because you're out of control. You're not in control at all. Since you're not in control, you're exempt, period. Yeah, but if that's not the case, you're the person, let's say, just lazy. Person, I don't know, whatever reason, they don't feel like doing something when it's not a legitimate thing. They're liable. They're absolutely liable. But as we said before, things have to get done. Sundown, you can't light candles. Friday nights. You'll say, but God wants me to light candles. That's called mitzvah b'aver. That's called doing a mitzvah at the same time of transgressing. That's not what he wants. What he wants you to do is to light the candles before. What if you didn't? What if you got delayed this, that, and the other thing? You didn't do it. Very good. You didn't do it. So what happens? You didn't do it. But I want to fix it up, so let me light. Yeah, but it's 10 minutes after sundown. It's an hour after sundown. It's 2 hours after sundown. Say, but I got delayed, I got this. So what? You lost it. Right? The mitzvah is lost. You didn't do it. You didn't do it. You can't fix that up. There's no possible way to fix it. So you got to prepare. Life is about preparation, right? No matter what you do. So therefore, when I'm obligated to do something, the ability to go out and do it is made much more difficult. Based on time, based on outside factors. based on the weather. Let's say, a person walks out, to go to synagogue, it's pouring rain, it's freezing cold, whatever it is. Okay, you got to battle, you got to battle the elements. Very good. Now, in some cases, you might be exempt. I mean, it depends what it is, but in general, doesn't matter. I don't think God's going to expect the person to get somewhere in a hurricane. Not going to expect that. Right? The elements are too great. Okay, you can't get there. You can't get there. Okay, right? It's understandable. But other circumstances, like someone's asked me, if I walk to synagogue, it's very hot, whatever. Yeah, it's very hot. Okay, to move closer to the synagogue, I can't. Okay, right? So what happens when you sweat? So you sweat. What are you gonna do? Or even better, you got a 10-minute walk, 15-minute walk. Yeah, it starts to pour. Can't take an umbrella. It's forbidden. Even if it's open before Shabbos, still can't use it. Very good. So what do you do? Guess what? You get wet. I always tell people, when it's pouring, you got to learn to, walk between the drops. So like, yeah, but you're soaking wet. As I said, I didn't say I knew how to do it. Yeah. So you get wet. It's inconvenient, for sure. You're soaking wet and this and that. Yeah, it's inconvenient. Wouldn't it be better to take an umbrella if it works? Yeah, it would be. Some umbrellas very, very wimpy and like a strong wind will just snap it in half. Okay. Well, let's say, yeah, you take it. Yeah, so that'll help you stay drier. Okay. Are you allowed to? No. Don't want you to get wet? Don't want you to get wet. So this is the way it is. Yeah, it's not, again, there's no way around certain things. Sometimes you have leniencies I can work around, okay. But in general, something like this, even if the umbrella is open before Shabbos or a festival, you can't use it. Totally forbidden. Yeah, imagine you live in a place like Seattle. You live in a place like, England, right? It rains there all the time. What do you do on Shabbos? You get wet. That's what you do. You get wet. Yeah, but some people will be incredulous today. They'll say it's the craziest thing. First, they'll say it's better to take your car. So you won't get as wet. How many transgressions are there when you start your car? Plenty. When you drive, plenty. Yeah, says, oh, I don't have that option. Right? Driving's forbidden. Okay. So now they say, okay, if driving's forbidden, so use an umbrella. Because it kept you somewhat dry. But you can't. On a festival or Shabbos, you know how to use it. Even if it's open. So people say that's the craziest thing. If you believe in God or whatever, okay, very good. You believe in God, yeah. Does God really want you to get soaked? Is that what he wants? He wants you to get totally soaked? Someone else calls a niece. A blessed memory of Avram Shai Karlitz, who started the community in Bnei Brak. Went to Giants, the last generation, according to everybody, nothing to talk about. And one Shabbos, I don't know, it was Friday night, Shabbos day, whatever it was, his head got smushed somehow. I don't know, got bent, whatever. So someone asked the Rebbe, like, why don't you just put it back into place? So that was forbidden. That was forbidden to put it back in place. Right, whether it's void in a building or I don't know what other category come under. I think that was the main category would come under. But he said, some of your stature walking around with like a smooth fat, not fitting your stature. Is that what are you talking about? He holds it's forbidden according to the laws of Shabbos, right? So even if it wouldn't be according to my stature, won't God say you're transgressing Torah prohibition or rabbinic prohibition? Either way, he said that is the honor of Shabbos, right? That is the ultimate honor of Shabbos. Why? Because you're not changing. You're not doing something that's forbidden so it'll look good. Yeah? You're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to do it. That's the only hat you have. Okay? So that's what you wear. You can say it's not pretty, it's not that. Okay. And about being pretty, is it permissible or not permissible? So Chazanish said, this is what God wants. He wants me to wear it anyway. That's what he wants. Even if it's smushed or somewhat smushed. Yeah, I can't fix it. But he's not going to synagogue or whatever without a hat. So that's what I wear. So the person will say, that's the craziest thing. You gotta look dignified, you gotta, this, that. Okay, but if it's forbidden, what do you do? What do you do if it's forbidden? Stuck. So people say, I can't imagine even, why would God want that? Because he gave us certain laws. He gave us certain things to do and not do. Very good. That's what he did. And he wants you to keep it. Even if it means walking around with a smush tab. Even that far. Now, some people look at that and say, that's crazy. Or let's say, person walking outside. Person walking outside on Shabbos, they have a button that's like half falling off. So what would logic dictate? Pull it off. You pull it off, you put it in your pocket, and someone hopefully will stitch it up later, will sew it up later, and, you won't lose the button, let's say. Very good. A lot of people probably say that. But guess what? That might be a Torah prohibition. Or at least a rabbinic prohibition. You'll say, but you look stupid wearing this coat with a dangling button. True. And maybe it's going to fall out by itself. Very good. It's going to fall by itself. Who says you have the right to pull it? Regardless of what category it comes under, it's forbidden. In either case, forbidden. Or if that's like, let's say, wool coming out of like a zipper. Let's say on their coat. What do they want to do? They want to pull it off. Similar type of thing. Right? So what do we do practically speaking? Not allowed to. So again, the button I think is a better example. It's dangling there. Probably going to fall off at some point. Maybe not. Yeah. You're not allowed to pull it off. That's the honor of Shabbos. That's the point. That is the honor of Shabbos. That's what God wants. He doesn't want you to pull it off. Right? But someone may say, I look totally foolish walking with it outside. Okay, take another coat. Take another jacket. That's going to be the case. So I don't have another one. Okay? So that's what you have to do. But it's not a question of how a person looks or how stupid it is. It could be stupid. Could be a totally stupid thing over here. Okay? Does that negate the fact that I'm not allowed to do it? No. What do other people see you and they're going to make fun of you? So what? Better made fun of in this world, many times over than that happened in the next world. Yeah, so you say, okay, given a peer pressure, I ripped it off. You happy? I ripped it off. Okay. So now no one doesn't say anything. You get upstairs, when a person dies after 120 years, God says, on that day, he says, oh, look, you ripped off this button. You have to get punished for that. But God plays the video and he says, okay, I understand you got made fun of. I understand there was peer pressure. Yeah, very good. But let me ask you, was it permissible for you to do or not? They gave in the peer pressure. Peer pressure, is something very serious. Okay. Well, it doesn't mean you're allowed to transgress whatever it may be because of peer pressure. Now, it could be. It could be. God's going to take it down maybe a few levels because the person was under pressure. Maybe, they should have been able to overcome the pressure, whatever it is. Okay, it is a serious thing. It's not a small thing. Definitely not a small thing, but it's not going to make it permissible for someone to do it in general. Right? So God can say, I see, people said things, people made you feel uncomfortable. Yeah, but at the end of the day, what'd you do? At the end of the day, you took that more to heart than my Torah. You thought that was more important than my Torah. Again, how God's going to judge it, how severe it's going to be. Okay, God, God will judge it as he sees it. Okay. Peer pressure is something. I'm not going to say it's not. It doesn't give you free reign just because of peer pressure, right? In other words, people are going to make fun and say, "Come on, you're keeping these antiquated laws, and you know, you're doing more walking than I am driving my car, and this and that." Like people say things, yeah, justifying what they do against what you do. Okay, but a person has to be strong. Person and say, okay, they don't understand. If we can't explain it well, even the more you explain it, the more they're like, this makes sense, and this is this. And okay, so show them a website, get them other information, but they don't want to hear it. They just want to say it's strange, it's weird, going back to ancient times. We live in the real world. Times have changed. I heard a lot in the conservative movement. Times change. Okay, Torah doesn't change. Torah's forever. Right? Many times you go through the Torah, I will explain when the Torah says this is forever, right? That it means exactly that. All right, why don't we do certain things, this and that? Okay. Tell how to use it for any number of reasons. Very good. Yeah. But forever means if we didn't do things wrong, it would be forever. And this would be the situation. But it's not. People say, the rabbis make things up. You ask one rabbi, same question, you get different answers. Different things. People like to say a lot of things with no knowledge behind it, or very little knowledge. Sometimes they'll ask a legitimate question. There could be many times they'll have a legitimate question. It'll be skewed the way they see it. But they may not like the answer. Okay, so doesn't mean it's the only answer. There could be many other answers. What is it? They don't like any of the answer. Okay. Right? At the end of the day, we have to do what we need to do. We have obligations. Right? I'll take it a step further. Chofetz Chaim says, in the laws of Lashon Hara, if a person works for somebody and something happened, you know the information. Boss puts a lot of pressure on you to get the information out, and let's say it's information not allowed to reveal. And the boss comes along and says, "If you don't give me this information, you're fired." Chofetz Chaim says you're not allowed to give over the information. 100%, you're not allowed to give over the information. Now, that being the case, the Chofetz Chaim says, "But what if you have no money? What if you have to go banging on doors to get money?" Chofetz Chaim says that's your obligation. Right? That's your obligation. Now, someone could say, I don't understand. God wants you to be poor? No. I mean, maybe. Maybe he doesn't want you to be poor. I don't know. But in this case, how could God want you to lose your job? You're helping out the boss. You're giving information. Yeah, at the expense of someone else. Right? So comes on the Chofetz Chaim says that's forbidden. Even, if you have to go around collecting money for yourself or your family. That you have to do. Now again, you look at it at face value, a person will say, really? The Torah is about losing your job? Is that how far the Torah goes in this case? Yes. In this case, forbidden. Right? If it's forbidden to do, you can't give over this information, let's say. And the boss is going to say, listen, you got one more chance. If you don't give me this information, you could be there for many years, doesn't matter. Boss says, I want the information. You don't give over the information. He says, if you don't give it over, you're fired. You have to lose your job. Even if it means, the Chofetz Chaim says, even if it means you have to go collecting door to door. Just to make ends meet, just to live. Now, the obvious question is, come on. Will really go that far? Person has to lose their job. Person has to go collecting. Yeah. That's how far it goes. I think that some people will say that's ludicrous. Why would God want you to lose your job? I don't know. Maybe something better out there. So it's going to make you lose your job. So you find something better. Yeah, better hours, better money. I don't know. Or maybe, you're supposed to suffer that way for however long. till you get back on your feet. Okay, whatever it is. That's the obligation. That is the obligation, says the Orthodox. Nobody disagrees over here. It's according to everybody. Now, is that a hard test? Oh yeah. Sure it is. Yeah. I gave him certain information, lost my job. When I was in South America. Didn't take it as far as I should have, but whatever it was. So I called up my Rebbe, told him the story, and I asked him point blank. I said, what happened to integrity? What happened to integrity? People don't care. People lie. This, that. He started to laugh. I literally started to laugh. I said, well, I didn't say anything really funny. I mean, not yet. I said, why are you laughing? He goes, welcome to the real world. He said, I deal with this, all the time. And I said, people learn integrity is like, I sat with him in the Haredis, the most powerful rabbinical court in the world. For 5 years, once a week. So I saw people, long, big hats, long coats, and there were people who just lied through their teeth. People messed up other people because of greed, because of other things. And he used to tell me, it's a good thing you have a connection to me, otherwise you have Chalisha Zadas. It's like you lose hope. Like you became religious, see all these religious people, that lie, lie and cheat and steal and this and that. That's not the cheap rabbit where anybody off the street, comes in with complaints or who knows what. Yeah, that I can understand. Because you have all types of people. The people coming to this rabbinical court are like the religious. They want to come to the best rabbinical court, the highest standard, blah, blah, blah. Yeah? But you can see what people say and what people do, and you're like, this guy's a thief. This guy in general is a thief. Doesn't want to pay. Whatever. Right? I'll give an example. Someone comes in and he found a rental from somebody for his son. And he didn't want to pay the other agent. So the other agent asks, well, how'd you get into the apartment? How'd you see it? And he said, you gave me a key. You got me in. Thank you very much. Case closed. Right? But he says, but I'm also, what do you call it? I'm also a real estate agent. So, you shouldn't have to pay. They threw him out straight away. Straight away. He didn't want to pay. Bottom line. So it simmered. Finally, the guy took him to Basin. Took him to the rabbinical court, and he had to pay. So as he's walking out, it's kind of a funny story. As he's walking out, he says, who has to pay? Me and my son-in-law. So my husband says, you guys fight amongst themselves. Because you guys fight it out. He said, whoever wants to pay, yes, will pay. Right? You want to pay. Right? Whoever ends up paying doesn't really matter. But what's the bottom line here? This guy had to go to rabbinical court. I had to admit. I had to admit. I was open shut case. Not every case that I saw came in was, clear cut. There were a number that were pretty clear cut. You have some of them, a lot more details and different things. This is very clear cut. Yeah. This is very clear cut. Also, I'll just mention one other story. Someone came in, I don't remember the details of the story, but someone came in, hired what they call a towing rabbanit. Someone, that's like like say an overpriced lawyer, but it's someone who has learned, a lot of these laws and different things. They represent the client. They represent their clients. This guy's yelling and screaming this and that. But I'm sitting there listening, and I'm like, I even know, and I wasn't certainly an expert in these things, certainly then, not necessarily an expert in these things now either, but, that's my Rebbe afterwards. I said, listen, even I know, little old me, even I know this guy has no claim. He's got no claim at all. He's got this high-priced, lawyer or whatever, to yell and scream and this and that. But I said, even I know he doesn't have a claim. I said, there's no embarrassment? There's no embarrassment to give such a claim, knowing that it's probably going to get thrown out anyway. So he looked at me. He said, listen, if I pay you that much, you'd also make such a claim. I'm like, not true. So now I wouldn't. But he said, this is how some people make their living. They represent people in court. Okay. I'm not saying they're all liars, per se. Some are. Some are very good at what they do. Manipulating information and different things. Okay. But wherever you said, if you pay someone enough, they'll do whatever they can to make the lie sound truthful. Yeah, but you say, how can people do that? Aren't they supposed to be religious? Ooh, $1 million question. Aren't they supposed to be religious? Yeah, they are. So what happened? I can think of a million different scenarios. What's the main scenario? Greed. A real estate agent. This guy doesn't want to pay. So the real estate agent for finding the apartment. He's the one who found the apartment. So the bottom line is he doesn't want to pay. What's the halacha? He's got to pay. You can't squirm out of it. He's got an obligation to pay. That's it. They don't want to pay. Yeah, I saw some real estate also. I was a middleman between buyers and sellers. I had people that try to mess me around for a couple $1,000 because they won't have to pay. Yeah. But the thing was, they wouldn't have found this deal if I didn't give it to them. They're like, I don't need you. Of course you need me. You would have found the deal otherwise. Right? So anyone I spoke to, I make them sign a non-disclosure, which really doesn't really go that far. Doesn't have a whole lot of weight in secular court, but you do it to build trust. You say, okay. You do it to build trust. Very good. What happens? Right? What happens over here? What happens is, if someone says they won't sign, you move on because they'll mess you up. They will mess you up in no way, shape, or form. They'll mess you up or potentially mess you up. So it builds trust. Or there are people that, they wanted to make more money. So what do? Try and shyster you out of the deal. If it's a big deal, I can understand. Say, oh, I'm going to make $25,000 off this deal. Very good. Yeah, so I'm going to try and either get you to come down or try and get around you or whatever. That I can understand. Right? But save a few $1,000. Yeah. Why would they do it? Because they want to make more money. Instead of making, I don't know, 30% on the deal, they want to make 32% on the deal. They want to make 40% on the deal. But they can't do anything without you because you're the one who brought the deal to the table. So you have to be compensated. Very good. And it doesn't matter if you spend 10 minutes on the phone with somebody. It doesn't matter if you sent an email. That's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Right? You deserve to be paid. Either way. Either way. Right? So, I had some people scream at me and they're like, they're like, you don't trust me? I'm like, sign. Just sign it. Yeah. Or say, I don't need you. Okay, find your own deal. Right? It's very simple. Very simple. People agree. I thought real estate was bad until, there are a lot of fields that are bad. When it comes to greed and this and that. And they want to, make more money for themselves, and they'll try and flatten you like a pancake or make you make less in different ways. Right? So at the end of the day, whatever you make, that's what God wants you to make either way. Right? You can't be a simpleton in these cases. Right? You gotta put your best foot forward. But again, what do you see? You see that even the more a person knows, person can be overcome by greed. Person can be overcome by wanting to commit fraud because they want to pay tax. Yeah. Or someone I know that admitted, or at least they admitted, when they got caught. People want to know, why would this person, money launder? So I wouldn't answer. I said, you have to ask them. And I got in a whole lot of trouble for that or whatever. So I told the story before. But what's the simple answer I could have said? Simple answer was, I don't have to answer for this person. He has to answer. All I said was, I was happy he admitted he did something wrong. And he took that totally out of context. Oh, you said it's a good thing. I didn't say it was a good thing. I said I'm happy he admitted it's wrong. Right? I never said what he did was right by any stretch. I didn't even insinuate that. But say, you owe us an explanation. You owe us an explanation why I did what he did. I don't want any explanation. So at the end, they kept badgering me. So finally I kept building up. And I said, no, I didn't go ask me. Ooh, they don't like that. Like that. Now, what would be the simple answer? I mean, you don't have to be, it's not rocket science. What would be the simple answer of taking a lot of money laundering it, put it through different places? You don't have to pay tax. That's the simple answer. You're talking about not a small amount of money. That's going to be taxed. You don't want to be taxed. So what do? You put it in someone's hands, someone else's hands, through this institution, that institution, whatever it is. You do it through the back door and you get it in. Very good. I mean, not so good. It's against the law. Very good. Yeah. Right. So someone wants why would someone do that? I'm like, come on. Like, are you really asking a question? Why would someone want to do it? I didn't give them the answer because I said they have to answer for themselves. But I had a very simple answer. Might not have been the only answer. They want to pay tax. That's the answer. Yeah, that's probably the answer. Yeah, now if you would have pinned this guy down, that's what he probably would have said. You knew it was illegal. You're right. So why would you do it if you knew it was illegal? Because you're getting free money. You're getting free money, you don't have to pay tax on it. But you know it's illegal. You're right. I still don't want to pay tax on it. Right? Still don't want to pay tax on it. It makes perfect sense. The only problem is it's illegal. Okay. Could have been there other reasons, yeah. I'm pretty sure that was probably the main one. It could be other reasons. Right? That's another important point. At the end of the day, after 120 years, when we die, God's not going to ask you, why weren't you like this person? Why weren't you like that person? God, everybody has to answer for themselves. Someone once told me, said, well, this Orthodox Jew committed X crime. I'm not religious, but I didn't do that. And since I didn't do that, I don't have to keep Torah mitzvos. I'm not kesher. What's the connection? No connection there. What's the reason there's no connection? Because God's not going to ask you about this person. This person, yeah, they got caught, whatever. What's the price? In this world, the next world, both worlds, doesn't matter. They'll pay the price. That's not your question. Your question is not why this person do this, do that, do the other. Right? Even if people do the wrong thing and the person gets messed up to the other person, whatever, okay. God's going to deal with them. And God used them to get to you as a stick, as we always say. Okay. But we have to answer for ourselves. Bottom line. We're not answering for what someone else did or how someone else acted. God's not going to give a rat's tail when he's judging you. You're not going to care at all. A person can bring that up. It's not going to come into the equation. Because God's not going to compare you to anybody else. He's going to say, you should have done this or you should have done that. You could have been much greater, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but he's saying, look at this person. Look at that person. Why are you looking at me? Because God's judging you. It's not a question of who we're compared to. The question is what we did and what the source of our soul is and what we could have done, right? 2 movies. The Zohar says a person will see after they die. What's the first movie? What you did, right? Anyone's ever had an out-of-body experience? So we always say, what's the first thing they see? What's the first thing that happens? They see their soul hover over the body. They see their life flash before their eyes very quickly. Very, very quickly. Every last thing. Bam, 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 right? Very quickly. What they've done. There's a second video. Now, what's the second video? The second video is what their potential was. Right? And that is one form of what Gehenna is. Not the only form. Why do I say it's a form of Gehenna? Because that's totally embarrassing. You can't say I didn't do it. Right? 2 angels follow a person wherever they are. They're the ones going to give testimony in front of God, all things you did, good or bad. It's like, we're recording now. They're going to record every last thing that a person did. So you can't say you didn't do it. Right? You can't say your hand wasn't in the cookie jar. It wasn't in the cookie jar. Right? God says, it wasn't in the cookie jar? Let's go back. Play back the video. Right? Back to Warner Wolf back in New York Sports. Go back to the videotape. Yeah, let's go back to the videotape. Yeah. Your hand was in the cookie jar. Bottom line. Bottom line. Your hand's in the cookie jar. Now, you can have 10 reasons why your hand was in the cookie jar. can have legitimate excuses. God can say yay or nay, but you can't say he didn't do it. Right? That's going to be the most embarrassing part. Right? That a person's going to see every last thing they've done. When you've seen everything you've done, it's embarrassing. Right? Even when, you're behind closed doors or whatever. No one can see what you're doing, but God sees what you're doing. These angels see what you're doing. That's part of what hell is. Right? Part, not the whole thing. Certainly not. The sheer embarrassment. I don't know how a soul gets totally embarrassed. That's sheer embarrassment. Literally sheer embarrassment. That's the second video a person sees. But you can't say I didn't do it. You might be able to say, give me another chance, send me back. Could be it's too late. No one's going back. No one's going to be reincarnated anymore before Messiah comes. Let's say it's the last chance. Okay. You can't say you didn't do it. And that's embarrassing. You can explain or try and explain why you did it and what the impetus was for you doing it. You could do that. 100% you could do that. Right? But God's going to say, you can say no. You can say, I don't buy it. Here's what you were thinking. Here's why you did it, right? Because God plays all this, plays all back. Shows you what your intention was, where you're holding, what you should have been doing. Again, a person has an evil inclination, as we've been speaking about, and they gave in, and this. Okay, so it depends on a lot of different factors. Depends why you did it, depends how you did it, where you're holding, right? Not on past or future potential. Talking about right now. Right at that split second. So God's going to judge at that split second. Okay. When a person sees that movie, guess what? That's embarrassing. That's going to be totally embarrassing. Because then God's going to show you why you had to go through certain things, why you did certain things, whatever it may be. And there's no room to hide. Right? You are a pure soul now. You understand absolute truth. By understanding absolute truth, there's nowhere to hide. You can't say I didn't do it. See, if we were able to do that, that's great. Be able to hide what we've done. We can't do that. Why not? Because again, even if I didn't have two angels recording everything we do, God knows what you've done. But just like a court in this world, judge is going to say, bring me all the evidence. So the evidence is going to come. It'll be good evidence, bad evidence. They'll cross-examine it. Very good. So too in the upper world. So too in the heavenly court. We're going to say, but God knows everything anyway. Okay. God's got a lot of messengers. He's busy doing other things. So even though he knows how it's going to go and what's going to happen, he said, okay, bring me the evidence. Because couldn't a person say, even when they're dead, couldn't they say, you got to think of the circumstances, you got to think of what I did or what I didn't do, right? Whatever the case is. So God's going to evaluate the evidence. Just like in a court in this world, same thing. Right? Does God have to do that? No. Is it like God doesn't know? God knows. He knows all the thoughts of everybody. He knows what's going on. He knows where everybody's holding all at the same time. Like, he knows. Okay. But he wants to show he's being fair. And he's going to take the evidence. He's going to say, okay, bring up the evidence. One angel's going to bring up all the mitzvahs they've done, some stronger, some weaker, whatever it is. The other angel's going to bring all the transgressions they've done, some stronger, some weaker, and then God's going to evaluate. He's going to evaluate the power of the mitzvah, the power of the transgression, right? They somewhat offset, or they don't, or this. He's going to evaluate. Does he have to? No. Does God know everything beforehand? Sure. But he's going to do it like a regular court to show you. Beyond the shadow of a doubt, even though you don't need it, that God's going to say, okay, bring the evidence. We're going to judge the evidence as we see it. Yeah? So all the evidence is going to come up. Now, I can't imagine how embarrassing that is. Yeah? The good things that a person does very good. And things that they didn't think they get credit for, let's say, very good. And some things they may get a tremendous amount of credit for. And then they see the transgressions. Now, some things they didn't think was a transgression or whatever, or wouldn't have even dawned on them. God says, well, you got to mind this over here. Get a huge mind that's over here, like you said, but I didn't do anything wrong. And God sees otherwise. Then God can show you, certain things that, you got mitzvahs for, but God saved your life in other ways. So he takes some of those extra lives, quote unquote, takes them away, right? God saved your life in one case, let's say for something. So he takes all the mitzvahs away. Some mitzvahs, not all of them. Some mitzvahs will be taken away. They can say it's not fair. Okay. But, if a person doesn't have extra lives, let's say, or mitzvahs to guard them, and it could be the God just takes their life at that point, right? Give one example. Many years ago, we said this before, a football player jumps in to save some people drowning. I think one or two of the people were saved. He drowned, and a few other people drowned as well, but he didn't really know how to swim so well. In either case, why did he die? 28 years old. Why did he die? Why did he die? So obviously God saw through his soul. Didn't have any extra lives, as we say. Right? He used up all his merits, whatever merits there were. No, he had no reason to be around. So God took him. Yeah, at a young age. That could be, I'm not saying it's the only reason. Right? But if he had done any mitzvahs in the world that were strong enough to save him, okay, so let's say, I don't know, let's say, he did 2,000 mitzvahs, right? Let's say, I can't imagine, but let's say he did 2,000 mitzvahs. Yeah, so now he's put himself in danger, which you're not allowed to do. Puts himself in danger, and he could have been saved. He could have been saved. What happens? Really, in this case, for him to be saved, he needed 5,000 mitzvahs. He needed like some really strong mitzvahs to be saved. God looked into his extra lives. They didn't have any. There's nothing that was going to come out of him anyway, so God took him. Again, I don't think it's the reason. Right? Could be many other reasons. Right? But the point is, if a person has some mitzvahs that are very strong, that can offset certain things. Potentially, in other words, you lose part of that mitzvah. Right? Again, let's say a person had, I don't know, 20,000 mitzvahs. You get in a bad car accident. Yeah, really, they shouldn't come out of it. Right? But they end up coming out of it. Now, it could be rehabilitation, broken bones, other things. Okay. How did they come out of it? Because God saved them. Now, why did he save them? They could have taken them. But it could be some mitzvahs that they did were strong enough that they lost some of it. Let's say they had, I don't know, 28,000 mitzvahs. So took out 15,000. But the 15,000 saved their lives. That can also happen. Right? Certainly can also happen. Yeah, you can have one mitzvah that's so strong that could save a person's life. Maybe not later, but maybe now it could save them. Okay. But it sometimes can offset, sometimes. But if you don't have any reason to be saved, you don't have any extra lives and done anything worthwhile to be saved, and God's going to check that, for future generations and this and that, to see, God sees again, nothing's going to come out of this person, nothing good, nothing, nothing whatsoever, so God can take them. He can keep them alive and, punish them later and whatever. He could, but in this case, he didn't. Right? So again, I'll get a lot of flack for saying that. People will say, you don't know what's in the thoughts of man. You don't know why God does things, blah, blah, blah. You don't. Yeah? We don't. Right? I'm taking a guess here. Right? I'm taking a good guess. I think it's a good guess. I think it's a good guess. If if you don't have what to, if you don't have what to give to the world, let's say, and you don't have any outstanding mitzvahs that can protect you, because mitzvahs do protect you. Yeah. If you don't have any mitzvahs to protect you, or a significant amount of mitzvahs to protect you in a certain situation, that could be it. I'm not saying it will be. I'm not saying God can't have mercy and save them. Right? But this just goes to show one thing. I mean, it shows a number of things. One thing it shows is that you don't have to put yourself in danger. You can have the adrenaline going, and we've spoken about this many times, I'm not going to speak about it now, right? But, you're not allowed to be foolhardy. And if you are foolhardy, and a person ends up dying, they don't go down as being righteous per se. They go down as being stupid in certain ways. I understand why someone would do it. I'm not saying I don't understand, but when I took junior high state when I was in camp, as a 15-year-old or 16-year-old, right? You don't. First thing we were taught is you don't jump in if you don't know what you're doing. You can't jump in if you don't know what you're doing. Yeah, that's putting your life in danger. Now, again, if you have to jump in, and many times, we'd have to jump in with all our clothes on. Yeah, all our clothes on. Our clothes are heavy, right? But again, you have to know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, you don't jump in. So you tell me in this case, there's nothing you can do. No long sticks, no long this. So what happened? He jumps in. Absolutely jumps in. We're not gonna say every case a person jumps in, and they die. That is the case. There there are stories of people jumped in, saved their kids. The kid got saved, and they drowned. They get taken out. I've heard a number of stories like this. It's also tragic. Yeah. Nobody wants to see, a child of theirs drown or whatever. Do whatever they can to bring them up, but could they die in the process? Yeah. Yeah, that's adrenaline. Yeah, I get it. I get it, but the question comes up, if a person does that and they drown, you gotta say, why didn't God save them? Very good question. But I would ask a different question, right? It's always good to ask a question with a question. And the other question would be, why'd they jump in? So I can give you 10 reasons why they jumped in, all of them valid. All of them valid. But who says you're allowed to put your life in danger? That's, if it's a doubt whether it's a danger, that's a different issue. If it's a doubt, if it's clear-cut danger, right? You're not allowed to go in, depending what it is, right? Depending what it is. Now, there are many people on October 7th that felt they had an obligation, knew they could potentially die. They're doing it to defend the land, okay. That's suicide. Some people came out alive, some people didn't. You take a first responder, someone in an ambulance, they got ambushed. But they were there to save lives. Why did God take them? I don't have an answer. You can say, where's the army and where's this? Okay. You can ask the question, but there are people that are going to do regardless because that's a job. Or a person be a firefighter, a policeman, whatever, they're putting their lives in danger, but you need them. You need people in the army. Here, you need certainly people in the army, right? So people are risking their lives. You're right. So why do they die? Because God takes them. Why? For sin, most likely. But, even if they look like they're doing the right thing and they have an obligation to. Yeah, they have an obligation to. Now, could they come under fire and be killed? They could. Right? So they say, how can you put your life in danger? Good, that's a good question. Right? But if you didn't have people like that in general, then it would be a disaster. The whole world would be a disaster. Imagine anywhere. There's no police force, right? You want to defund the police force, the stupidest thing anyone can say. Because they're the ones protecting you. The less police around, the worse it is. Certainly the worse it is. So if you don't have that, place go chaos. It'd be chaos. It'd be worse chaos than it is today. Much worse. So you need people in these positions. They're risking their lives. How they allowed to put their lives in front? So good, it's a good question, but you're allowed to. You're allowed to. Now, even in the line of duty, let's say, fighting terrorists, this, that, and they end up being killed. They're gonna say, but they put their lives in it. But different issue. Now, could have God protected them? Yeah. Why didn't he? See, if I knew all these, all the answers to these great questions, I wouldn't even be wasting my time doing this. I'd be world famous. Be world famous, but there are no prophets. The only prophets today are fools. Fools or what do you call it? Little children. So there are no prophets today. Nobody knows. Nobody knows why these things happen. Yeah, so you understand. Someone, tries to go save their family, run into burning building, the building explodes, they die also. Now, everyone's going to look at that person as a hero. Yeah. Why did the person die? Because he shouldn't run into a burning building. Right? So why did God protect him? Beautiful question. Beautiful question. They say, well, they're meant to die that way? No. Well, that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. Very good. Right, so we don't know the answers to these things. God's going to judge. What I can say now, what I said up until now, could be totally not true. Right? In other words, God takes some people, doesn't take other people, for any number of reasons. Any number of reasons. I'm speculating. Yeah? But I'm speculating based on a premise. And what's the premise? Normally, you don't put yourself in a situation that's dangerous. Now, sometimes you might have to. Okay. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Very good. And if you had a choice, you wouldn't do it. And you can't say, well, God's going to protect me. That's being a fool. Even if you have 100% trust in God and this and that, doesn't matter. Other factors can come along and you don't have that divine protection. But putting yourself in dangerous situation in general is forbidden. That you're not allowed to do. Right? In general. Now again, how God's going to judge it, he might judge it differently. But he took the person for other reasons. But anyone who gets saved, everyone's thankful they got saved and everything else. But what happens? The person runs in, tries to save, jumps in and, can't really swim so well and they end up drowning. It's a tragedy. Everyone's going to look at it as a tragedy. A question, a story here many years ago. Told this story, a 3-year-old falls in a manhole. Dangerous gas, nobody knows. Another guy runs in, saved the child, and he was in a coma. He's probably dead by now. So you got to save. I don't understand. Okay, why did the 3-year-old die? Don't know. But someone jumped in and tried and save them. Why were they in a coma for for so long? Shouldn't they have found out if there was toxic gas? They just acted on instinct. Very good. Now, it could be, I'm not saying it's the only reason. Could be, God said, you're a fool. You ran into a manhole. You didn't know there was toxic gas. You didn't prepare. I didn't have an obligation to save you. Right? The 615th commandment, don't be a moron. 614th commandment, don't be stupid. It's being stupid. I understand why I did it. Right? But someone asked the question, forget about the 3-year-old that fell in. The person tried to save them. Why should that happen to them? Now, what can we answer at face value? You shouldn't jump in unless you know what you're doing. How would you jump in and not ask, well, is it toxic gas? I understand. Adrenaline's running, you don't have time, this, that, very good. You have a very short amount of time, very good. But then you got to drag this person out also unconscious. But I was going to say the person's a hero. Okay. Yeah, it did something that, most people wouldn't do. Yeah, very good. There's only one problem. There was a danger involved. So people say, even though there's a tremendous danger, very good. He was willing to risk his life to save this person. Okay. All right, but it didn't turn out the way everyone thought. Okay. But again, logically speaking, he's doing it for no other reason, not to be the hero, per se. He's doing it to save the child. Very good. Altruistic. Very good. So why did God take him? Now that was their time to go, and that was the way they were supposed to die. Yeah? But again, at face value, as heroic as it is, you shouldn't put yourself in that situation because you don't know what's there. How are you allowed to put yourself in danger? So this could be God making a point saying, you put yourself in danger for no reason, same way for no reason. It wasn't their kid. So it wasn't their kid. Yeah? Well, they put themselves in danger. That's what happened. Again, I'm not saying that's, that's the word of God. That's what it means. I'm saying that's potentially what it means. Right? Why it was done, it makes perfect sense why it was done. But think about it. The person's going to jump into a manhole not knowing what's there, regardless of what happened before. They're saying they're taking a risk, okay. And technically, maybe they're forfeiting their life, maybe. But because of the adrenaline and other things going on, they don't care. Okay. Or they don't care about jumping in, even though they're not a good swimmer. I understand why. That's not the question. The question is, what's the end result? What's the end result? And are you allowed to do that? According to the Torah. That's the question. That's the question. right? But a lot of these people, yeah, they're going to be looked at as heroes. Okay, they're risking their lives. Very good. Yeah, and in God's eyes, God took them. But in these cases, God took them. Now, why did He take them? One of my guesses is they didn't have enough. They didn't have enough merit to be saved. That's one possibility. Certainly a possibility. Yeah. I mean, if you're going on a God-based world, that is certainly one possibility. Another possibility is God doesn't have an obligation to save you if you do something stupid. Ramban makes that point in the book of Job, right? That his friends try and console him, try to figure out why this happened to him or whatever. The Ramban says we may have a lot of claims against God after we die. Why this happened, that happened, the other thing happened. You could have saved me. You could have helped me in this case or that case. God said, yeah, I could have, but I didn't. God has an obligation to stop you doing something stupid at all time. Every time. You don't have to do that. Maybe sometimes He does. Maybe He'll show you, listen, I stopped you from this, and I stopped you from that, and I stopped you from that. But you know what? I don't have to stop you from being stupid. You got bad information, you didn't care, you were thick-headed, who knows what. I have to stop you from doing something stupid. Who says? Who says according to Torah it's my obligation? That's what the Ramban says. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the Ramban in the book of Job. Yeah, that's what he says. So, a person will complain and say, it's not fair. Look what happened over here. Why didn't you save me? Right? So what could God say, turn around and say? You go in 80 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone. If the hairpin turned, you flipped over, and this is what happened. I had to stop you. You did something that was out of control. I could have saved you. So the question is, why didn't He? Maybe you didn't have enough merit, maybe other things, but you did something reckless. Why does God have to stop you from doing something reckless? There are cases of people that fly out of airplanes, different things, they die. They end up dying. Why? I don't know, parachute problem, maybe some other issues, whatever. And people do things that are dangerous. Sometimes God will save them. I know someone fell off a cliff. Whatever. I don't know, 40 feet, 100 feet, whatever it is. Like, they should be dead. 100% should be dead. Broke a whole bunch of bones, this and that. I don't know, 100% a dangerous situation. That person has to be careful. Yeah, you have to be smart. God does not have to save you, every time you do something stupid or reckless. He could, right? He certainly could, no question. He doesn't have to. A person's going to get shocked. Why didn't you save me? Right? Again, if I were God, put on my funny George Burns glass, my funny mustache, what could I say? You were stupid. You did something stupid. I had to save you doing something stupid? Quit everybody was stupid, let's say. The stupidest thing you could have done. I didn't see any reason to stop you. You didn't have enough merit to be stopped, so you died. You didn't have any complaints. You did something that was dangerous. Right? Again, that's what the Ramban says. God doesn't have to stop you every time you do something stupid. Now, He can, and He probably does in many situations. Other situations, He doesn't. Your stories, people climbing up mountains and this and that and get blown off and different things, put themselves in a dangerous situation. Because they want to climb, they want to get to this point, they want to this, they want to that. Nobody says, people ask the question. It's somewhat of a silly question in a certain way. I understand why they're asking. Right? They say, God should save a person in every situation. Why? Why? A person, climbs up a huge tree. Say, you know what? I'm going to jump off. I'm going to show, whatever. Yeah, the jump off, it's, 100, 200 feet up, let's say. Yeah. And let's say they get seriously injured. I'm not going to say they die. Let's say they don't die. But they broke a lot of bones and different things. You think Evil Knievel back in the day? All these stunts he did. He said on himself, he broke like every bone in his body, at least once. But he got a name. Doing all these crazy stunts. Okay. He didn't die from it. right? It's not that I know of, right? He didn't die from it, but he took tremendous risks. He knew the risks he was taking. Yeah. So what happens when you take a huge risk? Anything can happen. And if God takes your life, you can't ask the question. It's not a fair question. You're taking unnecessary risk. Huge risk. Yeah. And you got burned by it. Maybe literally or not. You're going to ask God after the fact, why'd you stop me? God says, you stood on a tree, 300 feet high, and you wanted to, and you landed on your head and say, I'm not going to die from that. Right? I saw other people do it and they only got injured other ways. Yeah, you landed on your head. Very good. No helmet. In with the helmet. Yeah. God said, I didn't tell you to do that. Maybe the inclination egged you on. Maybe, who knows what. But you took a serious risk. I had to stop you taking a serious risk. Shouldn't a person know better? Sure. So a person's not going to say, a person may say, oh, that's a waste of life. Oh, I can't believe a person that, okay. But if someone risks their life to save someone and they end up dying, they're called a hero. I get it. Probably should be called a hero in different ways. In God's eyes, I'm not so sure he's going to be a hero. That's the way they died, okay. But are they going to be called God's eyes? Are they going to be like in the upper realm of, having a huge portion of the world to come? I tend to doubt it. And the reason is they took unnecessary risk when they shouldn't have, and they never right to do it. Again, it depends on the case, on the person, depends on a lot of different things. But I'm saying that I don't, from what I do know, that's a huge risk. I'm not talking about police or the army or other things. That's a different issue. That's a little different issue. You need people like that. Okay, so they know they're taking risks. That's all right. Right? That way it's all right, because you need people like that anyway. Okay. But can they die in the line of duty? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna stop here. I do this every Saturday. 2 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, Orthodox Conversion Judaism. On YouTube, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism. On Facebook as well, or orthodoxconversion.com. Send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com. Wish have a good day, middle of the day, end of the day.